So let's say you're somewhere in your late 20s, maybe your early 40s, and you've done everything you were supposed to do, right? You worked hard, you followed the rules, but there's this feeling that something's just off. It's this nagging question that just keeps popping up.
And it's not like it's a huge failure or some big tragedy. It's that feeling of being stuck, even though you've checked off all the boxes on the list. It's exactly like this quote says. You're not broken, but you're not free either. Today we're going to dig into the psychology of a whole generation that got caught between the promise of an old world and the reality of a brand new one.
This whole thing isn't just about what year you were born. It's really about this unique, intense pressure of having to basically rewrite your own life script as you go. So the big question is, why does it feel so wrong when you did everything right? All right, let's get into it.
Okay, so the very first piece of this puzzle is something psychologists call a broken psychological contract. Just think of it like an unspoken deal you have with society, If you do this, you'll get that. The problem is, for an entire generation, that deal was totally broken.
I mean, look at this. You were basically handed a script that worked perfectly fine for your parents or grandparents, and you played your part, you did everything you were told, but the world, the stage itself, was completely different. That core promise of work hard and you'll be stable, it just didn't pan out.
And the fallout from this wasn't just, worrying about money. It went way deeper. It fundamentally rewired how a whole generation sees the world. Suddenly, being skeptical wasn't just a personality trait. It was a survival tool. And thinking critically, that became a defense mechanism against a world that kept making promises it couldn't keep.
So this broken promise? It created this huge aftershock that led directly to something a lot of people are now calling the quarter-life crisis.
So what is a quarter-life crisis, really? Well, it's that jarring moment when you jump from the superstructured world of school into the wild uncertainty of being an adult. It's that uh-oh moment when you realize the map you were given is for a completely different country. And here's the thing that's so important to understand. Just look at this number, 75%. That is huge. So if you've ever felt this way, you're not just not alone. You're in the vast majority. This isn't some personal failure. It's a massive, shared collective experience.
And the symptoms, they're probably going to sound familiar. That deep feeling of being totally stuck, the anxiety that spikes when you're scrolling through social media, and that constant, nagging sense that you're somehow falling behind in a race you don't even remember signing up for.
Okay, so all of these crazy external pressures, they created the perfect storm for some really tough internal battles to start. And two of the biggest ones are what we call imposter syndrome and the burnout that it almost always leads to.
Imposter syndrome. It's that little voice in the back of your head that's always whispering, "You don't belong here, you're a fraud." It makes you feel like you're just wearing a costume, and any second now, someone's going to rip it off and expose you. Every single success feels like pure luck, not like something you actually earned. And this is the crucial part. It creates this absolutely devastating cycle. You can see it laid out here. First, that fear of being found out makes you a perfectionist, so you work yourself to the bone. But then, when you actually succeed, you just write it off as luck, which only makes the fear of being exposed even worse. It's a surefire recipe for complete and total exhaustion.
And of course, this whole internal battle is just cranked up to 11 by our always-on culture. This constant pressure to be connected, to be productive, to project this perfect image online, it's taken what used to be personal burnout and turned it into a full-blown cultural epidemic.
All right, so let's pull the camera back for a second, because bubbling under all of these psychological struggles is a really harsh economic reality that has shaped this entire generation's journey.
There's a reason people sometimes call this the unlucky generation. Just look at this timeline. It has been one relentless economic gut punch after another. We're talking the dot-com bust, the 2008 financial crisis, a global pandemic, and each one hit at the worst possible time in their careers. And this chart, it just perfectly lays out the core problem. You can see it right there. While incomes have pretty much flatlined, the cost of the basics, like getting an education or buying a house, has just exploded. The math just doesn't work anymore.
So all this data, it tells a pretty clear story of what people call delayed adulthood. But for me, the most telling number on this whole chart might be the last one. A staggering 87% feel that older generations just don't get it. They don't understand the reality of what they're up against.
But here's the thing. When you're faced with a script that's completely broken, you don't just give up.
No, this generation started rewriting the whole thing from scratch.
The very idea of success has been completely redefined. That old-school corporate ladder, it's been tossed out. In its place is a search for things like purpose and flexibility and building a life that actually feels authentic and whole.
And this isn't just wishful thinking. These are real, tangible actions people are taking. We're seeing a generation that's finally prioritizing mental health, that's demanding work with a purpose, not just a paycheck, and is looking for real, authentic connections instead of just chasing social status.
So what someone from the outside might see as instability is actually incredible adaptability. What might look like a lack of loyalty to a company is really a demand for meaning. This isn't a lost generation at all. They're pioneers forced to chart a whole new course because the old one just crumbled beneath their feet.
And maybe that's the final takeaway. The very chaos that shaped you is exactly what gave you the tools to navigate this chaotic world we live in. You're flexible where others are rigid. You find a way forward where other people just see panic. So the real question is, what are you going to build with that incredible strength?
All right, let's dive into a paradox that's on a lot of our minds. How is it that the very tools we built to help us find love might actually be the reason it feels harder than ever to find?
I mean, just think about it for a second. With dating apps, you literally have more options than any generation in all of human history. So why do so many of us feel more anxious, more overwhelmed, and lonelier than ever? It's this huge contradiction that sits right at the very heart of modern love.
And this isn't just a feeling. The numbers actually back it up. According to the U.S. Census, the average age for a millennial man's first marriage has climbed to a historic high of 28 and a half years old. This delay in big life commitments, well, it's not just a coincidence. A huge part of the story starts with how we choose a partner today. So first up, let's really unpack this feeling, this idea of endless choice, eternal loneliness, because it pretty much defines modern dating for so many people. This right here is the central problem. The promise was simple. More choice would mean more freedom and, better results. But for a lot of people, the reality has been this exhausting, endless cycle of searching, swiping, and always feeling like you're somehow falling short. Okay, so to really get a handle on why this is happening, we need to look at the psychology behind it. And it turns out there's this one really powerful theory that just perfectly diagnoses the problem. This whole idea comes from a psychologist named Barry Schwartz, and honestly, it is the key to everything. His theory basically argues that while sure, a little choice is good, too much choice is totally paralyzing. Instead of feeling liberated by all the options, we just feel overwhelmed and start second-guessing every single decision we make. You can actually break this whole process down into a really simple formula. When you're faced with endless options, your expectations for what a perfect partner should be, they naturally go through the roof. But here's the catch. Since no real person can ever live up to some imaginary ideal, the result is almost always feeling dissatisfied with the good, real people you actually go out with. And hey, don't just take my word for it. Here it is, straight from the source. Schwartz himself points out this totally counterintuitive results. The very abundance that was supposed to make us happier ends up making us miserable. It leads to that nagging feeling of regret, that constant what if, that constant worry that maybe we could have done better. So how in the world did we get here? I mean, this didn't just happen overnight. The way we date has gone through a massive, radical transformation. Just look at this contrast for a second. Traditional dating, what they used to call calling, was structured, it was local, and it was often supervised by the whole community. And the goal was pretty clear: marriage. Fast forward to today's marketplace model. The power dynamics have totally shifted. It's supervised by our friends, and it's all driven by the search for compatibility from a bottomless pool of digital options. And that brings us to the modern mindset, right? We often go into dating with a checklist, almost like we're shopping. We make this mental grocery list of all the traits we want, funny, tall, has a good job, and then we just swipe through people looking for the one who checks the most boxes. And here's where we see the real human cost of all this. When you start treating people like they're products in a catalog, you start to strip away their humanity. It becomes so much easier to just dismiss them, to ghost them, and to completely forget that behind every single one of those profiles is a real person with real feelings. Now, while this affects pretty much everyone, there's one generation that's been right at the epicenter of this massive shift. So let's zoom in on the unique psychology of millennials. Millennials are this fascinating bridge generation. They can remember what life was like before the internet, but they really came of age in a totally digital world. They were raised on all these promises of stability that kind of evaporated, which fostered this fierce sense of self-reliance. And after years of being told to follow your passion, a lot of them are just tired. They're exhausted by all the empty optimism and are looking for something that feels authentic and real. This whole psychological backdrop just pours gasoline on the fire of what we call the quarter-life crisis. You know that feeling? It's that period of intense anxiety where it feels like you have to make these enormous life decisions about your career and relationships, and the fear of making the wrong choice can be absolutely paralyzing. So this crisis really brings out two types of decision makers. You've got maximizers, who are obsessed with finding the absolute #1 best option, which of course makes them prone to regret. And then you have satisficers, who are just looking for something that's good enough, and they're generally way happier. Now, guess which mindset dating apps encourage? Yeah, they turn us all into maximizers, constantly searching for a perfection that doesn't even exist.
So what are the actual real-world consequences of this endless search? What's the price we're all paying for chasing this imaginary ideal?
Well, the fallout is pretty significant. It fuels a hookup culture that many people at the end of the day find deeply unfulfilling. It leads to serious emotional burnout. It creates this powerful fear of better options, or FOBO, where you're just too scared to commit because someone better might be just one swipe away. And all of this emotional pressure, often mixed with very real economic pressures, leads to huge delays in major life milestones. And this, right here, is the ultimate tragedy of it all. In this hunt for a flawless, mythical partner, we so often overlook or even sabotage relationships with wonderful, real, imperfect people who are right there in front of us. The good becomes the enemy of the perfect.
So I guess I'll just leave you with this question to chew on. We always celebrate choice as the ultimate form of freedom, but when it comes to our romantic lives, it really feels worth asking, have we reached a point where that freedom has become its own kind of cage?
You know, there's this quiet but absolutely massive revolution happening right now in living rooms and nurseries all across the country. We're talking about a huge shift in how a whole generation is choosing to raise their children. So, let's get into it.
Does that sound familiar? I mean, really let that sink in. For so many millennials, that feeling, it extends right to how they were raised, and it's fueling this massive decision to do things completely differently with their own kids. This isn't just about tweaking a few rules. It's about throwing out the entire playbook and starting from scratch.
All right, first up, let's really unpack what this revolution looks like, because it's not an accident. It's a very conscious, deliberate move away from the parenting styles of the past. It's all driven by this deep desire to raise kids who are emotionally healthy and resilient.
And you can really see the massive difference right here. On one side, you've got the traditional way. It's all about obedience, respecting authority, and using punishment to keep things in line. But on the other side, the millennial approach is completely different. It's more like a partnership. The priority is empathy. The method is dialogue. The child isn't someone to be controlled, but someone to collaborate with.
And listen, this isn't some niche fringe movement we're talking about. Look at that number, 74%. That's how many millennial parents say they practice what's often called gentle parenting. This is a full-blown tidal wave. It's a generation-wide shift.
Okay, so we've thrown this term gentle parenting around a bit. But what does it actually mean? What does it look like when the rubber meets the road? Let's get a really clear idea of the philosophy behind it.
At its absolute core, it's about connection over correction. The whole goal isn't just to stop a bad behavior in the moment, it's to dig deeper, to understand the emotion or the need that's driving that behavior. It's a long-game strategy, really, designed to teach kids self-awareness and how to manage their own big feelings.
So this whole approach is really built on 4 main pillars. First up is empathy. That's the difference between saying stop crying and I can see you're really angry right now. Then comes respect, treating them like whole people with valued thoughts and feelings. Third is understanding, which means, not expecting a 3-year-old to act like a 30-year-old. And finally, and this is the one that trips people up, boundaries.
And this is so important, because this is where a lot of people get it wrong. They hear the word gentle and they immediately think permissive. No rules, no discipline, just a total free-for-all. But that's not it at all. As the author here points out, it's actually what psychologists have been calling authoritative parenting for ages. Think of it as high warmth and high structure together.
So let's just bust that myth right now. The point is this: gentleness isn't about whether a boundary exists. The boundaries are absolutely there. It's about how that boundary is communicated and held, with respect and empathy, not with fear or threats.
Okay, so this all sounds amazing for the kids, right? A whole generation of children being raised with empathy and respect. What could be better? But, and this is a big but, this revolution has a hidden cost. We've talked a lot about the child's experience. Now we need to talk about the parents.
I mean, think about it. This massive shift toward connection, constant empathy, and regulating your own emotions as a parent, yes, it might be raising a generation of incredibly self-aware kids, but it is asking something enormous, something maybe even unprecedented of the parents themselves.
This right here, this is the invisible emotional labor of gentle parenting. It's the constant, draining effort to stay calm when you are just bone tired. It's the crushing pressure to be the perfect, emotionally attuned parent in every single moment. It's the sheer amount of time and energy it takes. And underneath all of that is this heavy, heavy burden of trying to break cycles from your own past.
And this quote, which comes from a study of parents trying to do this, man, it just says it all, doesn't it? It's the daily reality. It's that huge gap between the ideal you're striving for and the very human reality of your own limits.
And when that gap between the ideal and the reality gets too wide and stays that way for too long, it leads to a very specific and very serious problem.
Just look at that. 46%, almost half of all millennial parents report feeling burned out. And we're not just talking about being tired here. This is a much deeper, more profound state of exhaustion, and it's directly tied to the immense pressures of modern parenting.
So what is parental burnout, technically? Well, it has 3 key signs. First, just overwhelming exhaustion. Second, you start to feel emotionally distant from your own kids. And third, you get this crushing feeling of ineffectiveness, like you're failing, and you doubt you were ever a good parent to begin with.
And this vicious cycle is what often fuels that burnout. It starts with this impossibly high standard, perfection. The parent works themselves to the bone trying to meet it. Then, if something actually goes well, they just chalk it up to luck, not their own effort. That creates this intense fear they won't be able to do it again, so they set the bar even higher, and the whole exhausting cycle just repeats and gets worse.
So where does that leave us? On the one hand, we have this better, more empathetic way to raise children, but on the other, it's completely burning out the very people who are trying to practice it. The answer can't be to just go back to the old ways. We have to find a more sustainable path forward.
So what is the solution? Well, the expert consensus is pretty clear. The goal was never to choose an extreme ideology, to be 100% gentle and never ever firm. The real sweet spot, where both kids and parents can actually thrive, is where warmth and structure show up at the same time.
It's just not a binary choice. This whole debate of strict versus gentle is a trap. It's a false choice. The real goal has always been to integrate the best of both. It's about warmth plus boundaries.
Millennial parents are doing the incredibly hard work of raising a more emotionally intelligent generation. They've sparked a revolution inside the home. So the real question now becomes a much bigger one. Can we as a society build the villages, the support systems, and the grace that are needed to support the revolutionaries?
Okay, let's talk about the millennial rebellion at work. And no, forget all the stereotypes about job hopping or avocado toast. We're going to go way deeper into the real psychological shift that has totally redefined what a career even means for an entire generation. Does this sound familiar at all? You followed the script, right? You checked all the boxes they told you to check, but you've got this quiet, nagging feeling that the prize you were promised, well, it isn't quite what you thought it would be. If that's you, you're not alone. That feeling is right at the heart of this huge generational rebellion we're seeing at work. So, what does this rebellion actually look like in the real world? It's not about loud protests or picket lines. It's something much quieter, much more deliberate. It's a total reevaluation of what work is even for. And the scale of this shift, it's staggering. Get this, for over 80% of millennials, work-life balance isn't just some nice-to-have perk anymore. No, it's a critical, absolutely non-negotiable factor they look at before they even think about accepting a job offer. And let's be clear, this has nothing to do with being lazy or entitled. It's a very conscious trade-off. They are literally walking away from prestigious, high-salary jobs that just drain their souls. And instead, they're choosing purpose, they're choosing flexibility, and they're choosing their own mental health. The old live-to-work mantra of their parents' generation, it's been completely thrown out and replaced with a firm belief in working to live. So why did this happen? I mean, how did we get here? This wasn't just some random change in attitude. It was a direct response to a fundamental promise that was, well, completely broken. Think about it. For the baby boomers, the career contract was pretty simple and clear. You give a company your loyalty and you work hard, and in return, you get stability, a house, a pension, a secure future. But millennials, they graduated into a radically different world. They were hit with multiple economic crises, crippling student debt for degrees that didn't even guarantee a job, and a housing market that felt absolutely impossible to get into. The old rules just didn't apply to them anymore. And this isn't just a feeling, it's a reality that's backed by hard economic data. They've had to deal with more recessions and slower income growth at the start of their careers than any generation in modern history. For a lot of them, it felt like the game was rigged from the very beginning. And the psychological fallout from all that is crystal clear. 62% don't feel financially stable. Almost half feel completely trapped by their circumstances. And a massive 70% feel like they're behind in life. This isn't just about money. It's about being forced to put off major life milestones, from getting married to buying a home, which creates this deep, nagging sense of falling short. Now, on top of all that economic pressure, there's another really unique layer to this generation. They were literally forged between two completely different eras, the analog world and the digital world. This right here is the key. Unlike Gen Z, who are true digital natives, millennials are what we call digital immigrants. They actually remember a time before the internet, before everyone had a smartphone in their pocket. They are the bridge generation, with one foot planted firmly in the old world and one in the new. So think about the internal conflict that creates. Part of their brain was trained for patience, for deep, focused work over long periods. But they grew up just as the world was rewiring itself for instant feedback, constant connection, and immediate results. It creates this kind of permanent psychological tug of war. So what happens when you combine a broken economic promise with a brain that's caught between two totally different worlds? Well, you get a complete and total reevaluation of what a career is actually worth. The old currency just doesn't work anymore. And the result is a massive shift in values. The primary goal is no longer stability, it's meaning. Strict top-down hierarchy is replaced by a desire for flat, collaborative partnerships. And that dreaded annual review? That gives way to a demand for constant, real-time feedback. The entire philosophy has been flipped right on its head. And while some values, like, rewarding effort, are important to everyone, younger workers place a much, much higher premium on the human element. Having management that genuinely cares about them as people isn't a bonus, it's a core expectation. They want leaders, not just bosses. This quote from Forbes just hits the nail on the head. The new currency of a career is purpose. Simple as that. A paycheck might get them in the door, sure, but it will not keep them there. If a company can't clearly explain why the work matters, what its greater purpose is, millennials will just go find that purpose somewhere else. And here's the most important part of this whole story. This isn't just a millennial trend anymore. By demanding a new way of working, they are fundamentally reshaping the modern workplace for every single generation. These are basically the new rules of the game. They're demanding true work-life integration, not just some vague idea of balance. They expect open and honest communication from the top. They want to be coached and developed, not just managed. And they expect their employers to prioritize mental wellness and actually have a positive impact on the world. And now, as they start becoming managers and executives themselves, they aren't just asking for these changes, they're the ones implementing them. They are building the workplaces they always wished they had, creating cultures of empathy, continuous learning, and psychological safety where people can actually bring their whole selves to work. So let's end on this thought. This entire rebellion, this great reshuffle, it isn't really about being burnt out or just tired of work in general. It's about being profoundly, deeply tired of meaningless work. It's a search for purpose in a world that often seems to be lacking it. And that is a question every single one of us, no matter what generation we're from, should probably be asking ourselves.